Good. Okay, last item on the rules agenda is a resolution opposing a reduction in the Local Government Distributive Fund allocations. Mr. Manager.
Mayor, this item comes out of the village manager's office and comes based on conversations that you and I have had through mayors and managers and our positions within the executive committee and the management and finance committee. And in many respects, what we're trying to do is educate the public as to what the governor's proposed cut or decrease to the Local Government Distributive Fund would mean to Park Forest. What it does equate to is, and just a little bit of a backdrop for the public's sake, the Local Government Distributive Fund has been in place since 1969. It's been a small portion of the state income tax revenues that have come to municipalities as part of their annual fiscal planning processes since 1969. At one point in time, it was 10% of the overall revenue pool that came in from income taxes. Some years ago, it went down to 6%, and it's currently at 8%. And that's a lot of different percents, but what it ultimately means to Park Forest is it's about $49.50 per capita. What that equates out to Park Forest with a resident base of $21,975, it puts us at an amount totaling $1,087,000. And roughly that's 10% of the village's revenue stream when we look at our revenues and expenses. So if that's something that the state is looking for as far as solving its fiscal woes, it's a problem as far as the municipalities are concerned. Because as we see it, it gives the municipalities three options. You either, one, pass on that hole in your revenue stream to the taxpayers, you cut services, or you look at a combination of those two approaches. So what's unfolded is this concept of trying to engage the public to let them know what is being proposed by Springfield. We've actually drafted for the public's education this past Friday details encouraging Park Forest residents to understand what's being proposed, how it would adversely impact us, and then provide contact information so that legislators might be able to hear from the constituents and not necessarily just us. I believe that with any proposed cuts coming from the governor's budget address, municipalities, other entities across the state, organizations who may see a cut in their funding are typically going to have the knee-jerk response that this is not good for us and it's not going to work for us. So having our residents actually engage in any kind of phone calling or letter writing campaign that helps our legislators stand in the way of anything that the governor is proposing in Springfield, we think is probably going to drive that message home a lot better than we could. What's in front of the board tonight is a resolution opposing the reduction in the LGDF. It also communicates the village's support for any letters of opposition that have been crafted. I did include with tonight's agenda item the letter that's been drafted by South Suburban Mayors and Managers. There is one that's also been put together by the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus, and I do believe that the IML is doing a number of different things. The Illinois Municipal League is doing a number of different things to also get involved with the process. So with that, I would open it up to questions that the board might have, but also being mindful that we've asked residents to tune in tonight to pay attention to this conversation because it's a nuance of local governments and fundings that funding mechanisms that I don't know that the general public necessarily understands, other than it's an acronym. It's something that's 50 years old. So the more that we can help the public understand what we're trying to avoid and what it would mean to us, is I think what we're hoping to have out of this discussion.
Very good. Before we move to comments or questions from trustees, I just want to put some additional insight on this. Historically, the state of Illinois did not have an income tax. I think all of you probably remember that. In 1969, the income tax was created. It was when the new Constitution was in the process of being written. The Constitution was adopted by the citizens in 1970. And at that time, representatives of municipal government from throughout the state were advocating for the right for local government to impose an income tax. And the notion behind that was, on the part of a lot of municipal leaders, was that an income tax is a fairer form of taxation than excessive property taxes because it is based upon one's ability to pay. Income taxes are based on your income, obviously. The higher the income, the greater your ability to pay. And even though Illinois has a flat rate income tax, it still is much easier for people to pay the income tax by and large than property taxes, where you have no control whatsoever over how the marketplace may react to things, et cetera. As a compromise, when instead of not allowing municipal governments to impose an income tax, the compromise agreement was that the state income tax would allocate a portion that would go to municipalities with the so that municipalities could better fund their various operations, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's where we got the 10%, because that was it. Now, it's not codified in law. It was an agreement. And so that's probably one of the awkward aspects of it. In retrospect, it probably should have been codified in some fashion. So over the years, as the manager has said, there's been a fluctuation in terms of what percentage is actually coming to the municipalities. We haven't received the whole 10%. So now the governor is proposing this reduction that would cut it in half. I think there are several things, of course, that are problematic with this. One of the things is it's kind of a schizophrenic act, because on the one side, state government is saying property taxes in the state of Illinois are too high, and somebody needs to reduce property taxes, impose some constraints on property taxes. And yet, at the same time, if you're taking revenue away from us, and this isn't the first time we've had revenue taken away from us. We've had extra amount of money coming out of the utility tax that we didn't have to pay before. So we've been losing funds along the way that were dollars that the state were giving us. So what do? You're only faced with the options of you cut services or you increase taxes. And when your taxes are as high as what we see in the south suburbs right now, that's very hard to increase taxes. So the alternative of cutting services is what generally takes place. I was with a mayor of one of the northern suburbs that's financially in much better shape than we are this morning, and he was telling me what his municipality already has done in anticipation, because he believes even if the 50% reduction doesn't take place, there's going to be some reduction. So his community has already eliminated the newspaper that they circulate to their citizens, and they're kind of in the same situation we're in, where they don't have a newspaper that services their community. So how do people find out about local things? It's through the local publication, and they've eliminated that. So, everybody's taking different steps along the way, but no matter what steps you take, the bottom line is that, local services are going to be curtailed in some fashion or another. I think that, from my perspective, the most onerous aspect of this proposal is that it's a one-size-fits-all proposal, and one size simply does not fit all. There are some communities that could take a 50% reduction in their local government distributive fund allocation. Actually, they could probably take a 100% reduction and not really face any kind of complications, because where they're located, they have a heavy amount of sales tax, a lot of commercial activity, et cetera. But that's not the case in the south suburbs. And had the governor made a proposition that perhaps said something like the local government distributive fund will be reduced on a proportional basis depending upon the economic well-being of the particular municipalities, well, maybe, there would be less opposition to it. But certainly this one-size-fits-all simply doesn't apply. So that's a little bit of the additional background on top of what the manager has said. I have to say, among municipal leaders, there is a pretty universal agreement that this is a bad deal. which I find interesting because, usually politics comes into play, and those on one side, if the governor's of his party, they might support him on his actions, vice versa. And what we're seeing at the municipal level is pretty much a universal opposition to this. I have to say also, though, that what I find troubling is that there is a bipartisan aspect to advocating this. We have every reason to believe that there is legislative leadership that is supportive of this notion of reducing the Local Government Distributive Fund so that the state of Illinois has more revenue that it can hold on to for its own purposes. And while, we recognize the fact the state has fiscal problems that it has to deal with, it's kind of an unpleasant situation to think that the way those issues are going to be dealt with is by making it harder for local government. So that's kind of the genesis behind the effort to really what we're doing more than anything else is giving support to our local legislators. They have all expressed, that they recognize how bad this situation would be, and by hearing from the communities and hearing from the residents, it gives them strength when they're making the case in arguing the issue in the chambers, the legislative chambers. So that's kind of our intent with taking these actions. So any comments or questions, Trustee O'Neill?
Well, one of the thoughts I had when you were during the end of your comments was it seems almost like it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. And another thing is, I'm not trying to take over for Ken Kramer, but I just have a question that on the bottom of page 1 of the resolution, in the last paragraph where it starts Governor Rauner, is that supposed to be opened?
Opined.
Oh, okay. I was reading it wrong. I'm sorry. Okay.
Everything is fine now?
Okay. All right.
Okay. Trustee Kopachinski?
Thank you. And nobody can touch Ken Kramer.
I know. I wouldn't attempt. I did.
I'm just curious. Let's say we are successful and we lobby the legislators and they're universally against this. Does anybody know, is this something that the governor could do anyhow by executive action?
I don't believe that he can. I'm not sure of that, but because budgetary matters have to be approved by the legislature. The governor proposes the budget, the legislature adopts it. So,
even if this is not codified?
my understanding is that it's a budgetary matter if the legislature opposes it. I think the bigger issue is whether or not the legislative leadership will go along with it, because that's where the horse trading really starts to take place. So, but I don't believe that he can do it unilaterally. I can check on that for sure, but I'm virtually certain that that's the case.
Oh, that would
Trustee
be-
Brandon?
Thank you. I don't believe so either, but I'm not an expert, so. And so let's look, the legislature has veto, power, so even if he passes it there, if they're in supporting local government, then they simply can.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where if this were enacted by the legislature, if they voted in, the governor would have the potential to veto it, and then the legislature would have to override the veto. But this is a case of where a veto wouldn't probably come into play because he wants it. So if they pass it even by one vote, he's going to probably sign the bill. And if they pass it by one vote, you can't anticipate that there would be
Yeah,
strength to
right.
override it. So.
I would hope that that would not occur. I have had residents asking me about it and asking whether or not petitions and letter writing, and I encourage them to do that. I make references, my computer does its own thing, to our website and your article that you put on the website that Jason Miller has on the website. So if people take a look at that, they can get more information. So will we have some of the copies of letters available for residents that might want to get involved or to help them draft letters?
I think we could probably take from the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus letter, the SSMMA letter, and whatever the IML does, and put together some bullet points that people could use in individual letters if they wanted to. If they read through the material that's on the website, I think those bullet points are there.
Yeah.
But we can make it easier for folks by, you know, kind
Well,
of
that's why I
isolating
made reference, because the information is there, but sometimes if we can help them draft it a little easier by identifying things, then it might be easier for them to be willing to send out the letters.
Man, should you have something to add to that?
I did. As we were putting this together on Friday, the IML, and really kind of, I think, kind of a new twist for them, put together what I believe to be a pretty slick user interface for the public to be directed to, where you can actually type in the community that you live in, and then actually up will pop a letter that goes to or can be sent to your respective legislators, and that's for every municipality across the state. And so if we had a resident who came in and said, hey, I'm looking for some assistance, that's probably where I would lead them to, because it would actually craft something that would go to all of the legislators in any community. But what I've seen kind of on the back end is legislators are then sending feedback to the individuals who submit the email, just as a confirmation, send me your address so that I know that you're in my legislative district. But that would be a kind of a one-stop shop for residents if they're looking for a communications piece.
Can we put that link on our website? Okay. Other question, Trustee McCray?
Yes, I had both a question and a comment, and I think I'll start with the comment. No, I'll start with the question. I know of some measures within state government that require accountability for various things that have occurred in government, but how strong is the requirement for accountability within our state government for the things that they do that actually creates a situation of robbing Peter to pay Paul? I mean, it's not good fiscal management to take something in March knowing that you're going to create a deficit in April, May, or June, and without having a plan for that deficit that is going to come about because of the actions that were taken in March. You know, I think that it would be more responsible for, there are comptrollers and accountants, I don't know why they haven't done this. It would be more responsible to have someone at the elbow of the governor, have his ear and say, you know, these things we can do, but what are we going to do down the road after we've implemented the things that sound good to people right now? What are we going to do down the road? And I think that there ought to be legislation drafted to prevent that kind of activity.
Actually, when it comes to state matters, there now is what is called a fiscal note that is required on all legislation. So if a piece of legislation is going to have a financial impact upon you know, the state in one way or another, a fiscal note has to be attached to the legislation, and that lays out for the legislators specifically what the additional burden will be on the state of Illinois going forward. The unfortunate thing is it does not lay out what the impact is going to be on non-state governmental entities, in other words, local municipalities, et cetera. And in fact, as part of our legislative agenda, 2 years ago, I think it was, we actually put in our legislative agenda advocating that there be a municipal note attached to legislation. So if the legislature were passing something that had impact upon local government, that local government note would be crystal clear right there that your action is going to cause this at the local level. And we had one of our local legislators who introduced the bill to do that. And it never got out of the Rules Committee because leadership just simply didn't want to be tied to that kind of a situation because, obviously it would create more of a negative response to some legislation. And so it just never got out of rules. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with us continuing to advocate for that. And every time I talk to legislators, I do advocate for that. But, the fact is it's probably going to be very difficult to get anything done. Now, that being said, those are the official channels. At the same time, there are various better government groups, including the Better Government Association, the BGA. There's a few different taxpayers organizations that provide that kind of watchdog kind of supervision, but they're not official. It's just a matter of, pointing it out in a newspaper article or in a press release or something of that sort. So.
Well, that kind of takes care of the comment that I was going to make. But thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, Trustee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would there be a timeline if the bill was passed where the communities would feel the impact of the loss of the revenue?
My understanding is that it would be for the forthcoming budget, so we would pretty much feel the impact of it pretty quickly. Yeah. Okay. That's my understanding. The legislature has to adopt a budget. It's supposed to adopt a budget by the end of May. And if in fact this were to be something that the legislature was in agreement with, it would be in effect as of that date. Probably effective with the state's fiscal year. Right. The beginning of commencement of the state's fiscal year. So, other questions? Yes, Trustee Kopacz.
I just want to make one final comment.
Let me, first of all, I have to make sure that everybody who wants to speak has spoken once. Trustee Brown?
On the negative side of this, the impact that will hit us, instead of just government dollars, is the social services. And that's basically why I'm running here late today. It'll hit us tremendously on the social service side. And a lot of people are not aware. The mayor has spoke on it several times that the suburban problems are not the problems of yesterday. We have problems of inner city as far as social services are concerned now. And we're looking at losing a ton of money, and those social services will be closed down. On a positive note of this, from what I understand, is that the governor, his party, are not all on board. Some people are reaching on the other side of the aisle, and so that's one good thing that we have that's in our favor, is that all of the people that's a part of that party are not willing to vote in that same manner.
Actually, even the governor's wife has spoken out on the social services side because she's chair of a state agency that will lose.
I didn't hear that.
And now, of course, the governor's wife is not of the opposition party. She is a Democrat, even though I'm sure she voted for him. But you're right. There are people on both sides of the issue on this particular thing. And the truth is that the leadership within the legislature that is likely to go along with the governor on this are Democrats. Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton in the Senate. So it's, and I don't dismiss the desire to put the state's house in fiscal good order. I mean, I think we all recognize that there are problems at the state level, but it's the way that it's done is the problem. And I think particularly when you are hurting agencies, whether they be social service agencies or selective municipalities that are already 2 steps behind and are struggling to try to catch up with the mainstream of society. That's true. And that's, to me, that's a very onerous action. When there's a poem by, I think it's Robert Frost, the lines, it's actually a poem, ironically, that's called A Servant to Servants. And in one of the stanzas, the opening section is, "The worst that you can do to me is set me back a little more behind." And I think that is so illustrative of what we're talking about here. And it is the worst that can be done. When you're behind, and you're struggling to catch up, when somebody sets you further behind, that is the worst that can be done. So anyway, Trustee Kopachinski, now you have a second chance.
Thank you, Mayor. Just anticipating some of the rhetoric that might come out down the road, or some of the what do they call, super PACs or whatever that might get behind something like this. This is not a tax cut. This is, and if anything, they certainly could have done something to jumpstart the economy with a tax increase and with the minimum wage increase, and there are so many other things that could have been done. Looking to Minnesota and other places that have far more successful economies because of bold moves they've taken. But just kind of looking down the road, this is not a tax cut. We're going to be paying the same amount of taxes, the same percentage of taxes. We're just going to be getting less, $1 million plus less here on the local level. And that's not just going to affect, I mean, cutting back services, that's not just $1 million hole. That's less synergy in the economy. That's less of an energy that has potential to slow us down. I don't want to use the R word, but it has potential to really slow us down.
Well, and there are other impacts that we should, that do need to be considered. If we interpret that the loss that we have conceivably could mean a decrease of 5 employees, right? Isn't that roughly what? 8? Oh, okay, it's more than that. All right.
How many?
At first, I thought we were talking about 5. So let's say, for us potentially, let's take the conservative side. Let's say 8 employees. So if you say that $1 million cuts equate to 8 employees being lost, and then you take all of the cuts that are going to affect all of the South suburban communities, and you multiply that, each $1 million segment times 8, you're talking about jobs that are lost, where the economic impact of the salaries those folks are making right now, that's who's spending the money at the grocery stores and buying gas at the gas station and all of those kinds of things. So it does have an economic impact. I think that's the point you're making. There's a spin-off to that. Then when you add the social service aspects and the number of people who would have to be laid off from daycare centers and all of the other areas that will receive less funding, you just keep multiplying this. I remember several years ago when I was at Governor State University, we used to regularly put out what we called a regional economic impact statement. And what this did was it showed how many dollars, based upon the employees at Governor State University, were coming back into the economy and all of the communities around the university, because people were spending the money. They were buying goods. They were purchasing homes. They were doing all those things. Well, the inverse is also true. When you start to suck that employment out the bottom, then all of that money that would be spent in the region is lost, and so that's another aspect of it. So I think unless anybody has any additional comments they want to add. Obviously, the resolution is on the agenda for our next regular meeting is 2 weeks hence. But I would think that unless there is opposition for anyone, that we would allow staff to continue to do the work that staff is doing in terms of making the public aware, even though we haven't formally adopted the resolution and won't do that, and it won't be on the agenda till the next meeting. Because I think it's pretty much an information sharing situation at this point. Okay, is that agreeable to everybody? Because we won't vote on it at this point. That will come at our regular meeting. So that concludes our agenda for the Rules Committee meeting.